Soon is the youth and young adult back to school bash. It'll be this Saturday coming up. This Saturday, 5 p.m. And we'll go ahead and put out the future reminder. On Nighter is in September.
You missed a letter there.
No, that's what I call it. All nighter, not NIGH.
That's how he likes to do it.
You missed two letters.
It'll be all right. It's just a play on words. All nighter, that is in September. This would typically be our. This is the in between one, but we always try to do that kind of in September after everybody kind of starts to get settled back in to school and everything else for those of you that are in school. So, and the all-nighter is, we did that last year, and we meet on Friday night. You go out, it's a game of clues. You have to go around and find where you're being sent.
And hopefully not get to the point where you want to kill all the other people in your
Yeah.
It got bad right around 3 a.m. We're so done.
It is like that.
So
We have to take Chandler to
Yeah, we missed it last year.
some shit going on.
but right now, what is it actually scheduled for right now?
It's scheduled on here the 13th and 14th.
13th and 14th. We may move that up or back down a week. I'm not 100% sure, but just kind of keep it in mind. We still got those of you that need to work on schedules. I will figure that out and let you know next week for sure. So, and that'll be that. That's what we've got going on. The back to school bash this week, starting at 5:00. So,
Do we need to bring anything to that?
I've not been told. So, to my knowledge, I think the church is getting everything for that. All right. So now we'll go ahead and jump into Obadiah here. Still going through this book here, and the topic that we've kind of called it is the transcending vision of Obadiah. This is what God had given him. Obviously, the intro, we spent a considerable amount of time talking about who Obadiah was, who Esau was, who Jacob was. And then we've progressed through our 6 attributes, and we're up to number 5. Last week, we got to talking about verse number 15, when we talked about this being their reward. In this terrible part of the vision, it's kind of broke down into separate little different subtitles and subheadings and stuff. And this is what we're calling the terrible vision. This is where God is reliving a lot of the things that the nation of Edom had done to the nation of Israel, and also giving this as the reason why they're having to go through this soon to be coming judgment. So, verse number 15, we'll go ahead and read these 2 verses again. It says, "For the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen, as thou hast done, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall return upon thine own head. For as ye have drunk upon my holy mountain, so shall all the heathen drink continually. Yea, they shall drink, and they shall swallow down, and they shall be as though they had not been." So here we see in this, last week we talked about verse 15 being their reward. When he's talking about as you've done, it's going to come back to you. We talked about just how terrible that is, and how that's their reward. Just a lot of times you hear people today in today's vernacular talking about karma. It's their way of explaining the supernatural without fully understanding the things of God and seeing how God can use the things that we do to kind of come back against us, and use that just as here the old golden rule. We've heard that said. I would imagine you have. I know I did growing up. The golden rule, kind of the theme they teach through elementary school: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You don't want somebody being mean to you, don't be mean to somebody else. That type of thing, and that's all kind of found here in the Bible, especially right here where God's telling the nation of Edom, as you have done, that's what's going to come. I'm going to bring that same type of judgment back to you. So now in the reaping, and of course, if you've been around church and heard a lot of the Bible taught or preached, you know that the Bible tells us what you sow, you shall reap. It's just kind of common sense here. So as we see here in this terrible part of the vision, they're reaping. The nation of Edom is fixing to reap the things that they've done. Now, as we've talked about throughout this study, the nation of Edom has done a lot of things against the nation of Israel without doing a lot of things to the nation of Israel. A lot of the things that the nation of Edom was doing in their and to the nation of Israel was that they would give the people that God would bring up to as judgment, they would kind of point them in the direction. Like in this portion right here, you see God is fixing to send Israel into another captivity. They're getting invaded. Well, the nation of Edom would not let their brother nation step foot in their territory. Sort of like a brother and sister don't like each other stepping foot into their room in the house type thing. And Destiny's laughing because she knows that's true. But yet at the same time, it's just like, everybody can kind of be territorial. And that's kind of the way the nation of Edom was. Now, like I said, as we've talked over and over and over again, when it comes to the two brothers, Jacob and Esau being the father of the nation of Edom, Jacob being the father of the nation of Israel, and how Jacob came in and stole the birthright away from Esau and Edom, and Esau has had this, hate relationship towards them. Love to hate. They love to hate the nation of Edom or the nation of Israel, and therefore they would do anything they could to make their life miserable. Again, typical sibling rivalry type stuff. Only this progressed. Typically, it'll go on between a brother and sister, but eventually, like in mine and my sister's case, eventually you will kind of get to the point where you can get along with that sibling. But with these two, the nation of Edom and Israel, there was that strife there continually. It never subsided. Now, Jacob and Esau made amends. When Jacob came back to where he grew up and everything, when he returned home, but yet Esau and Jacob did make up, but yet their kindred, mainly on Esau's side, refused. They continued to hold that grudge against the nation of Israel. And because of that, they never would allow them safe haven or an easy track through their territory, through their land. They would make them go the long way around if they had to go just across. If it would have been a day and a half's journey to go right through the northern part of their territory to go over here, they would make them spend 5 days going around because they would not allow them to step foot into their territory. The same, like we said, my analogy with a brother and sister, not allowing each other to step foot in their bedroom or so forth. So as we see there, that's kind of the thing. So all of these things that the nation of Edom had done unto the nation of Israel, God has been keeping a record of. He's been logging it. So now the reaping, the time for God to bring the judgment comes due here in verse number 16, where he says, "For as ye have drunk upon my holy mountain, oh shall all, or so shall all of the heathen drink continually. Yea, they shall drink, and they shall swallow down, and they shall be as they had not been." So here we see the theme that I kind of thought of here first when I was studying this verse was, how many of you have ever heard the term poetic justice? What does what does that bring to mind?
The conclusion of justice in a way that it almost seems story-like.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Tupac.
Well, yeah.
A lot of the time, it is an ironic end to a person's life.
That's also kind of right
Well,
there in the
not
same vein.
In terms of death. But
No, but I mean, yeah, I mean, you're right. You're kind of hitting right there, and it's just however something goes along, that typically kind of comes back to you, and that term poetic justice is kind of the way I see this right here when it comes to the nation of Edom. It's just sort of interesting the way God has just kind of written this out and in this vision and kind of laid it out to Obadiah and telling him, this is what I'm fixing. This is what's coming. This is what, as we've studied this has just kind of been a building type of story that God has given Obadiah, and now he's given back. This is kind of, even though it's Obadiah was a Jewish person from Israel, you have to remember the same Edom was Jewish as well. Because like we said, these two are brothers, Esau being Edom and Jacob being Israel. So as we see here, these two brother nations are, they're just striving with each other to the point to where that all the striving against Israel is now fixing to come back to Edom. Because with Edom, when you study out Edom and how they progressed and grew as a nation, they were ruthless. They were not a large nation. They wasn't one of the largest nations, but yet they were skilled into the point to where that they could withhold their own. I mean, it's like, how many of you remember the movie 300? And if you've watched it, it's a movie about the Spartans and how there was just 300 and they went up against the vast Syrian army, and they withheld their own for several days with just 300 and everything. Now some of them kind of died off in the, I forget how long the battle was, 3 or 4 days. But then they got down and they died on the battlefield with honor. They were not going to quit. They were not going, to give up and everything. So when it comes to that, that's kind of the way the nation of Edom was. They could hold their own against somebody that had a bigger army than what they did. They were able to withstand them and hold their own and even fend off, larger enemies as they would come in. And of course, we know that, one of the territories at which they had a control over at this time was that area over in North Jordan called Petra, and how, just how difficult it was for people to kind of come in there and overthrow that area and so forth. So, it took a lot, but then what also kind of brought about their demise was they had an enemy from without that they had welcomed in, and that in and from within they helped take out, so that the forces coming from out could come in and overthrow the area. And that was how God brought about Edom's demise, as we've kind of already talked about. But here in this portion, God is saying, you're reaping it's going to be kind of a poetic justice from the way that you've mishandled your relationship with your brother, the way that you have done them. That is going to come back, and in essence, that's kind of the way God worked it out. When it comes down to the fact that here he is, he's the nation of Israel had certain places that they would worship and do different things, and had sacred meetings and all that, and how all of that got carried away. I mean, just like the Ark of the Covenant, and all of these things. I mean, you've heard people searching for the Holy Grail, and different things throughout history, things that's pertaining to the nation of Israel that are still today considered to be very valuable, have a lot of meaning behind, and people are still in search for a lot of those things even today, and everything. And we have kind of popularized what a lot of people believe was the cup, the grail, the cup that Christ drank of with the disciples in the Last Supper. That's kind of where that's getting its historical and meaning and sentimentalness and all that, whatever other words you want to use, why it's so sought after and this, that, and the other. But it still comes down to all of these artifacts, all of these things that had special meaning within the nation of Israel have now been taken and distributed and taken to different parts of the kingdoms that's overthrown them and everything. So here we see that same type of thing. Even the way it reads out here, it appears that even though Edom did not raise a sword against the nation of Israel, because as we said, you go back to Genesis and the promise God made to Abraham, I will bless them that bless thee, curse them that curse thee. That blessing right there, the nation of Edom knew. So therefore, I don't think that they were willing to raise a hand against the nation of Israel. But there at this last time, the straw, the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back type thing, was when the nation of Edom did go in and kind of partake in the spoils of this overthrow with the nation of Israel. And that is what brought God to the point to where he said, that's it. You've crossed that threshold. As we've talked about in here, pastors, send thermometer thing. Once you get to this certain point, it's done. Once you cross that line that God has out there, once we as individuals cross that, then we're on our own. And that's kind of the way it was when they did what they did here in this particular thing, when he's talking about they went in and partook of the things that the overthrowing nation would typically do, and taking the spoils and different things like that of the country that they just overthrown. The nation of Edom kind of come in and enjoyed and took a lot of pleasure in doing in what had happened, because this thorn in their side, this, the people that had the blessing of God that they felt was rightfully theirs, was getting in their mind their just reward. It doesn't matter the fact that, Esau could have asked his mother, because Rebekah was told by God, the older will serve the younger. God had it planned out for Jacob to be the one to eventually gain the birthright. Yet he was not, and neither was Rebekah, his mother. They were not willing to wait on God. They went ahead and got in front of God. And that's where Jacob his name, kind of means a betrayer. He's kind of a sneaky individual, and he comes in, and because of that, his mom they go out and kill a sheep, and then she dresses him up, because that's how Isaac could tell what son he was talking to. He couldn't, his eyes were bad. He was practically blind, but he could still hear, and he knew, because the Bible tells us that Esau was a hairy man, and he would feel the arm. And he even in the time when Jacob goes in and takes him the venison that Esau was renowned for making, that was Isaac's favorite meal. So Jacob goes in, because his mom, Rebecca, had figured out how to make it just like Esau. And so she made it, and then Jacob takes it in. And in that whole process, he goes, Jacob's saying, it's me, Esau. And he's like, you sound like Jacob. Come here and let me feel your arm. So he goes over and he feels his arm, and he says, my ears say you're Jacob, but my hand says you're Esau. So he went off of what he felt and what he touched, instead of listening. Jacob's voice deceived him. He could not imitate Esau to the point to where he could pull this off with Isaac. But he just felt of the sheep fur, I don't know what you call it, wool, I guess. I know it's wool. I don't know what it is on the sheep, or whatever they call it. But he felt, and it's like, well, I don't know. Maybe my hearing's starting to go like my eyesight has. And Jacob and Isaac kind of passed it off as that. But then Jacob, the supplanter, he kind of pulled one over. And then when Esau found out, didn't matter if that was what God was bringing about anyway. It just came down to the fact that here Jacob had gone in and done all this and stolen the birthright that was rightfully his, because God had promised it to him. So here we see, the nation of Edom has come in, and they're kind of taking spoil with the nation that had just overthrown Israel. I'm not 100% sure if this was maybe the Babylonian. I know later on it tells us that the Babylonians is the ones that God sent in. And it was probably in this time that Esau kind of let down their guard and allowed a lot of Babylonian influence in, and they kind of got people in to help bring down Edom from within. I don't know. But, it's still just kind of, I've not really gotten full understanding on that, but it kind of makes sense. But yet they kind of come in and they're partaking in that. So as we see, Galatians 6, 7, and 8, it says, be not deceived. God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. It's here in this verse we see the actions done towards someone being done in return. So, that's a little bit of Bible to kind of back up what we were talking about here when it comes to their reaping. They're reaping what they've sowed. The nation of Edom had sown bad blood against their own brother, to the point to where God is saying, that's it, you're done. I'm going to bring judgment against you because of the things that you have done against my people. An interesting note is that Edom went to this extreme just once. And now look at what it cost them. As we said, when it's in all of the time of the nation of Edom and Jerusalem, or I keep saying Jerusalem, the nation of Israel and the nation of Edom, they have shared a border. They've lived close to, right next to each other. Sort of like, family a lot of times. Like my wife, for example, over here, we wound up buying some family property that's right next to the property she grew up on. So me and us and her mom are neighbors. We also have her sister that lives back up behind us on our property. That's, there. That's kind of the way it is. They're separated by property line, so to speak, and they're living close together. So there's a lot of interaction, even though that interaction here within the biblical account of Edom and Israel, that whole account has been fueled by just tension and strife and fighting with one another. They still shared a common area. They still shared a border. So here we see that at this time, Edom has went to this extreme. Now, like I said, they've lived there. They know what the nation of Israel does anytime they've sinned against God, and God has brought judgment against them, as has been their history throughout the Old Testament. God would bring them into captivity and then bring them out of captivity, bring them back into captivity, bring them back out of captivity. A lot of times mimicking our Christian life if we're not careful. A lot of times we'll be doing good, going along with God just good, and then boom, we'll fall flat on our face, and we'll kind of go through a little chastening of God. And then we're kind of outside of God's will till we get things right with Him and get back into the will of God, and then things will kind of pick up for us, and we'll go along, and we'll be walking in the Spirit and walking with the Lord and doing everything else, and then boom, all of a sudden we'll fall out. That's kind of been the yo-yo effect of a Christian life, mimics the yo-yo effect of the nation of Israel a lot. And I feel personally, that's recorded in the Bible for our benefit. Because if we're not careful, we'll get to the point to where the devil will start sitting on that shoulder, so to speak, or the flesh will start whispering in our ear, there's no point. How many times are you going to fall? How many times are you going to sin against God and get out of fellowship with Him to the point you might as well it's not worth it. It's not worth the fight. It's not worth the hassle. It's not all this, that, and other. And that's what the devil will tell us. That's what the world will tell you. That's what society will tell you. That's even what your own flesh and your own mind will tell you a lot of times. But what I'm here to tell you is that along with the nation of Israel, it's worth it. It's worth fighting to get back into fellowship with God. It's worth staying with Him. It's worth getting back in relationship with Him and making those strides and those inroads to get back into fellowship with God. To the point where Israel was headed in that direction. And then, of course, we know that when it comes time for Christ to be crucified, God has blinded their eyes to the point to where they're still blind to the reality of who Christ was when He came and died. So as we see, there is that, they're going to be saved. God's going to come back for them. And when He comes and raptures the church out of here, their eyes will be opened, and they will realize that a lot of the things that they had heard about who Christ was and the fact that they had at that time. See, a lot of times we kind of get this, or at least I'm afraid a lot of times we get this mentality that, we see how ungodly, how far away from God, and how, the nation of Israel it kind of is when it comes to a relationship with God, because God has pulled His Spirit back from them. They're kind of just going through blind religion right now. And when it comes to that, if we're not careful, we can find ourselves in that same one. But it comes right down to the fact that God is going to reopen their eyes when the church is raptured out of here. And that's us, obviously. When we're gone, when Christ steps out on the cloud and raptures the church out, then the nation of Israel's eyes is going to be open. They're going to see, oh wow, and that's their eternal security in the fact that they are still God's chosen people. God has not turned His back on them. God has not forsaken them. Just the same as God has never turned His back on us, God is never going to forsake us unless we forsake Him within our free will. Like last week we talked about, our mind, we still have full control of our mind, where we don't have to worry about losing our salvation because we believe in eternal security. But our mind, we still have the ability to make up in our own mind whether or not we're going to follow God, whether we're going to serve Him. That's kind of the way it is. So here we see with the nation of Israel, their salvation is locked up in the fact that God has still chosen him. He's not forsook them. God's never going to forsake us. So as we see here, it just took Edom going to this extreme one time, and then God said, "That's it. I'm bringing judgment against you. You've, as we talked about the thermometer or the barometer, you have gotten to that point to where right here's the cutoff, and once you hit this, it's sort of like, growing up. I mean, a lot of y'all had an easier time growing up than I did, and I didn't have the 1, 2, 3. I'm going to get you, and then they start counting over again. And the kid knows today just how far they can push mom and dad before they really are going to be in trouble. I didn't have that. It is, you got looked at, and if that look didn't do it, you knew you were getting it. And I got it. That's kind of the way it is. That's kind of the way, parenting today, kids kind of say, okay, I can do this. Okay, and I'll pull back a little bit, and then they'll go right back to doing what's getting them in trouble, and they'll pull back. That's kind of the way it is with us and God in that thermometer, that barometer there. And it's that once we get up to this point, and once we cross over this line, and mom and dad's had enough, then we know, oh, I shouldn't have done it that last time, because now I'm in for it. Now I'm going to get time out. Now I'm going to get grounded. I'm going to have my phone taken away or whatever. I didn't have that luxury. I just got a beating. I mean, I got a whooping. That old-fashioned, old-timey whooping. And that's just kind of the way it is. And that's what's happened here with the nation of Edom. Only the nation of Edom was completely and totally destroyed to the point to where there is not a nation of Edom even today. There never will be another nation of Edom. So even when it comes to us and our parents, we're just going to get some type of correction, and then we're going to continue on. We're going to be able to move right on and go along with our life. And that the same kind is true with us with God. I'm not saying this is the way it should be, but what I'm saying is that a lot of times if we're not careful, excuse me, we can get to that point to where we're flirting with that, is this going to cause God to not deal with me again, or not open a door up for me to serve in a ministry or whatever? Granted, this is all different than the salvation. As a child of God, the salvation's always there. But having his Spirit strive with you and continue with you and lead you, you can get to the point to where he just turns you over to that reprobate mind, like we talked about last week, when it was their reward. That was the nation of Edom's reward, was he just turned them over to that reprobate mind. And they just kind of went on and had no use, no dealings for God in their existence. So as we see, like I said, this is all kind of just the terribleness of this. I mean, it's just like a parent. We'll go back and use that as we kind of close up here. A parent. I mean, how many of you have ever had to get a whooping or a paddling, and mom or dad comes in and tells you, this is going to hurt you worse than it does me? Have you ever heard that statement? And you're like, how? How is this going to hurt you worse than it does me? Once you become that parent, you understand exactly what that means. It means that in their loving attempt to try to keep you from earning that reward, reaping what you've sowed, once you get to that point to where that has to come, that correction has to come, it does hurt the parent's heart. When I had my two sitting back here, I didn't have dreams and thoughts of getting to beat them on a daily basis.
Wow.
That never crossed my mind.
One more than the other.
But what I am saying And maybe that came out just a little wrong. I don't know. But I mean, when me and Lori hadn't decided it was time to have kids, that never played into it. Oh man, I'm going to have 2 kids, and I'm going to get to do to them what I got done to me. That didn't play. That never once crossed my mind. That was not the goal of having kids. But having them kids, and then having the responsibility for the outcome of their character being placed on me, that was something that I had. There was a lot of teaching, there was a lot of instructing, there was a lot of, okay, now you're going to have to, you've earned this whooping, and this is why, and you have to go and explain why you're having to actually bring a little bit of correction in their life. And yes, they probably didn't understand. But looking back on it now as young adults, they would have to say, just as I do, they have to say that in the moment, in the time, I didn't understand it. In the moment, in the time, I hated you for doing that. But now, as an adult, as a productive member of society today, I can look back on it and say, I understand, I appreciate you because you helped make me into what I am today. I mean, I can look back on the correction that I got when I was growing up, and I can look back on it today. I survived. I'm not scarred for life, but I can look back on it and say, a lot of those things helped mold and shape me into the human being that I am today, the man that I am today. And I can appreciate that, even though at the time I didn't appreciate it, but looking back on it, I can. And that's kind of the way it is with God, with our relationship with God. Whatever we put into it, God is going to bring back. If we put into it, running away from Him, then we're going to reap what we sow. We're going to reap the judgment. We're going to reap, the things that God's going to bring against us. But if we're out here working for the Lord and following Him and everything else, He's going to bring joy. He's going to bring an excitement. He's all of the good stuff of serving God is going to be what we reap, not the sad, downtrodden. My Christian life is so hard. Well, why? Why is your Christian life so hard? Could it be because that's what you've sowed? Is this a life of little fellowship with God? And that's why your life is not going the way you envisioned it? That's kind of the way it is right here with this troubling vision. God is reliving all of this. And He's bringing all that back to remembrance, and it troubled God. But yet God is just, and He had to bring about the reaping that Esau and Edom had brought on themselves. So next week we'll kind of jump down and start the last portion of this, dealing with the triumphant vision. All right, you are free to go.